Hello and welcome to Nigeria Votes, and we're live from our Abuja studios. How well the management of the Nigerian economy will improve the standard of living of the people, that will go a long way to determine who becomes the next president. Will the present economic policies carry Nigerians to the proverbial promised land, or is there a dire need to improve or review some of these policies? Well, today in the studio to shed more light on these economic policies and how they may affect the voting of the people are a former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Obadiah Mailafia. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much indeed.
We also have with us an economic consultant, Mr. Tope Fashua. Thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot for inviting
This
me.
is Nigeria Votes, and again, we're live from our Abuja studios. My name is Kelechi Emekalam. Now, let me begin with you, Mr. Fashua. What effect do you think the re-electioneering has on the economy?
Oh, you mean the electoral process and campaigns going on?
Absolutely.
Well, you know, I mean, before the electioneering actually kicked in, different views had been expressed in the past. I remember someone asking me if there's going to be a spike in inflation. And I said then that I don't see that happening, because usually, let's follow the money. I mean, if money is spent, usually a lot of the money moves between one big man and the other, you know, because the big people that have the influence, and that usually they would be looking at sending such monies abroad. And I said you should probably look at the exchange rate of the Naira around then, much less inflation. And I think true to those words, today what we have is a Naira that's gone crazy, keeps dropping almost on a daily basis. Inflation is still manageable where it is. I think it's about 9% or thereabout now, 8%. You know, it's not really, because the money doesn't get spent like, you know, just given to people not that much. You know, a bit of you know, just a little bit of sprinkle there and there. And of course, people may want to discuss the methodology of capturing inflation and all that, but that's just semantics. So yes, there's a lot of buzz, but I think that another thing that's going on now is that perhaps what has happened on the global economy is having more effects on the electioneering process than the electioneering process having effect on the Nigerian economy. Because, I mean, very typically, the drop in the crude oil price, and like I'd always say in other fora, we never knew just how vulnerable we were, to the extent that just a month or two after this drop in the crude oil price, what do you have? Salaries have been owed, contractors have been owed, the vulnerable are suffering more, even though somehow the people who are campaigning still find the money to campaign, and it's a lot of money being spent. Everywhere you turn is a campaign, online, on the road, everywhere. So, but at times I think that it's really unfortunate, because I think that the really vulnerable people of this country have been left in the lurch, while those who want to campaign somehow find the money to campaign.
Now, before we go into some of these details that you have put in, let me ask you, Dr. Obadiah, can we have economic stability without political stability?
Well, very important question, and I'm very happy to be here, Kelechi, and my good friend and brother Fashua.
It's great to have you here.
It's a pleasure, Tope. And well, they go together, don't they? I mean, from the history of democratic republics, going back to the 18th century the young American Republic, founded by people like Thomas Jefferson, John Quincy Adams, George Washington, and the rest of them. From those histories, we know that free republics that are stable also must have strong economic foundations. And it is also a well-established fact in political science that a stable and prosperous middle class is a rampart and a bulwark for democratic stability. When you have a thriving and flourishing middle class, then they have a vested interest in maintaining political stability. So yes, indeed, for you to have a stable democracy, you need a strong and robust economy. to support it.
Now, what would you say is obtainable in this part of the country, I mean, in this part of the world?
You know, I've been out of the country for almost 5 years, and each time I come back, I notice something interesting in spite of all that is being said. And one salutary development is that the middle class is re-emerging. People who are here don't realize it. But if you've been away and you've come back, you notice that something very significant is taking place. That the middle class that had disappeared almost totally during the military era and the early years of our democracy in the early 2000s, there was no middle class. You were either up there or you were just down there. You know, lecturers could hardly, feed their families, or fuel their cars, and all of that. You know, nurses, the same thing, and teachers. But now we are seeing an emerging middle class.
But how much of that are we seeing? How much of, I mean, if you say, what percentage, rather, would you say could we see at this time in the middle class?
Well, I have not done enough research to place a quantitative figure on what it is, but it is very clear from observation that people who could not afford cars before are affording cars. People can afford to send their children to good schools. Nurses, teachers are owning cars, they're owning properties. This did not happen even 8 years ago. So this is a new development. Okay. And that shows that in spite of all the challenges, and there are many challenges, many false challenges, I'm sure we'll have opportunity to look at those, okay. But in spite of that, one saving grace is that actually, in spite of it all, a middle class is emerging. Okay. And I think that is good news for our democracy.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Fashour, you did mention the fall in oil prices. How should the next government, I mean, whoever emerges in the next government, deal with this problem?
Well, yeah, I'm an accountant as well, you know, so as well as being an economist. So we would always tell you that there are two ways of making money or profit. It's either you reduce your expenses or increase your income. So now that, okay, I think as we speak, the crude oil, the Brent crude price is back to around $60, but it trended down to about 48 before picking up, 47, 48 before picking up. We're not sure if this rebound is going to be sustained, or maybe it's going to end up around 60 or 65. But what is obvious is that we were too reliant on this crude oil price. I mean, this crude oil itself, you know, and any nation that sells anything crude without refining it, you're not going to get value for it. I mean, for every barrel of crude oil, you'll be shocked at the number of products that can be made out of it. I mean, the number of derivatives that can be got out of it. So, for as long as we are a crude economy, we're not going anywhere. I would think that our focus should not be on crude oil, right? And I don't think our focus should be on extractive industry per se. There's this rhetoric about, oh, God has put it there for us to use. I think it's a bit irresponsible. And like some people will tell you that if you take whatever is in the ground today and use it, note that God hasn't put it there for our generation alone. God has put it there for generations unborn. Therefore, if you take it today and spend it today, if we excavate the ground and leave a huge hole there, that's unsustainable. That's unsustainable economics. And that's why, in fact, I was watching a documentary recently based on a book called The Prize by Daniel Yergin. And, you know, it chronicled the development of the oil and gas industry over time. And there was a time that the Americans and the Brits were moving into Saudi Arabia to talk to the queen, to the king of Saudi Arabia to start extracting their oil. And one critical thing he said is this, that they decided to do that in order to conserve the resources in the Western Hemisphere. So they weren't going there, not even for the money that will be made. Of course, they cheated those guys for a long time before those ones also woke up and so on. But they weren't going there just to do business. They were going there to conserve the resources of the Western Hemisphere. There are many places in the U.S. today that you can't extract crude oil, not because the crude oil is not there. So how should they deal with it? Number one, we have seen how vulnerable we are to the price of crude oil. I think the focus should shift away from that. There are many avenues of making income in this country that we haven't explored. It's about Naira and Kobo, for example. If you went to any other developed economy outside Nigeria, there are little progressive taxation that they take from people. We're not talking about VAT increases here, because VAT goes across the board, affects almost everybody in a bad way. Of course, the government makes money. Of course, people are not very happy paying taxes to government because we also see what the government does with the money. It's about making those in government more comfortable. If you are taking taxes from us and you're buying more private jets or more jets or more official SUVs for yourselves, building huge structures like the governors, some of the governors that we've seen, building all these mansions for themselves, or even if it was you were building legislators' quarters, you go to many of the states, that's what they build, like commissioners' quarters. People don't want to pay, because we keep forgetting one very critical thing, that there's a principal-agent relationship between the people of Nigeria and those who are either elected, selected, appointed into government positions. They are the agents. We are the principals. We should not be the ones serving them. They should be the ones serving us, quote and unquote. So, to a large extent, there are progressive taxes. A simple tax, like, for example, a vehicle tax, a car tax, that is graded on the basis of the capacity of the engine. That's what they do in the UK. If you drive a 1.3-litre engine car, you pay a certain token to the government. If you drive a 4-litre engine SUV or a 5-litre engine SUV, then you pay a good amount of money to drive it. In this country, we have, and I think that the elites have protected themselves for too long. I mean, people want to be able to buy 40 of these SUVs and park in their houses and pay next to nothing to government. It doesn't work, because you also have to look at the effect on the environment. Do you know that if we can do this, we'll raise a couple of trillions in this economy? We will raise a couple of trillions in this economy. A very well-administered property tax, we're not talking of mansion tax as enumerated by this, the coordinating minister at this time, but a very well-administered property tax will rake in a lot of money for the government. So we should begin to look totally away in places like Norway and some of the Scandinavian countries. Doctor will probably be able to tell you better. They sterilize all the monies that they get from this extractive industry for future generations.
Okay, Mr. Fashwa, thank you very much. Now, basically, he's tried to talk about, diversifying the economy, taxing and all of that. Now, let's talk a bit about the diversification of the economy. It has become like a sing-song in every campaign. Now, how should the next government go about doing it?
This is something that should have been on the agenda of policy 20 years ago. And it is a great mistake that our leaders did not look at that until now, and we are doing basically just paying lip service to the whole idea. And the recent crash of oil prices have once again made it very clear that it is extremely imperative that we diversify the economy. And we can learn lessons from other countries. Fashwa, Tokwe has already mentioned the case of Norway, where they had a sovereign wealth fund over a generation ago that has today is almost worth $1 trillion in savings. It is one of the most successful wealth funds. They've put aside money for future generation and for the rainy day. And another good example is the UAE. They're literally sitting on a massive lake of oil. But their leader, their president, Sheikh Zayed, the late Sheikh Zayed, decided almost 20 years ago that in 10 years' time, oil will account for less than 50% of their foreign earnings and their government revenues. And within 10 years, they achieved that. How did they do that? By massive investment in education, by massive investment in human capital, by building up the infrastructures, by repositioning the UAE, particularly Dubai, on the global political economy as a global marketplace, linking the Middle East, Eurasia, and Africa. So today, all our young people want to go to Dubai to shop. It didn't just happen by accident. They deliberately set about to create an economy that is not dependent on oil, and they've achieved that very successfully. There are other examples, Malaysia, Trinidad and Tobago. I've worked in some of those countries in terms of the work I'm currently doing. It has taken me to some of those countries, and you could see that you have to push the agenda by restructuring the economic base, by building infrastructures, by, of course, going into other sectors like solid minerals, like services and others. Once you can do that, you can achieve it. And we should not forget that a country, if you've been to Paris, Paris is literally sitting on oil. They knew that almost 100 years ago. But say, you cannot, Paris is Paris. Okay, the Cathedral de Notre Dame alone is worth billions because it's so ancient. It's almost 1,000 years old. How are you going to clear that cathedral to dig oil? So they just said, well, it's a non-starter. So these days, sitting on oil actually means nothing. And it is about time we realize that. But the other thing to give us hope is that the last rebasing of the economy does show that oil actually occupies less. It's now about 50% of government revenues, which is good news. And other sectors are coming up, services, telecoms, agriculture. We're seeing they're increasingly occupying more of the GDP. And so that means that the economy is gradually diversifying, but not enough. What we need is a massive agro-based industrialization of Nigeria. That is the foundation of diversifying the economy and absorbing this increasing army of unemployed youths.
Thank you very much.
I think this is the way to go.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, you are watching Nigeria Votes, and we're live from our Abuja studios. We will take a short break, and the program continues right after. Do stay with us.
Tvcnews, effectively covering Africa and the world through African eyes.
What is right? What is wrong? What is acceptable?
Are we waiting for Nollywood to train our children for us too?
What is unacceptable?
Nollywood is trying to imitate Hollywood. Why are you not criticizing Nollywood?
What would you call the norm? Many are the questions that society asks, seeking to draw a line between yes and no.
Catholic Church, they don't deal with this issue of sex, marriage, infidelity, in-laws. Those are the four monsters that affect marriages.
You can control what you see, okay? But there are certain things that the daughter cannot control.
The Big Issue on TVC News.
Welcome back. You are watching Nigeria Votes, and we're live from our Abuja studios. Well, we have been speaking with a former deputy director of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Obadiah Melafia, and an economic consultant, Tope Fashua. They've been in the studio talking about the economy. Well, just before we went on that break, you did mention how we can use a massive agro base, to diversify the economy. Now, let's talk about the rebasing first. What has been the impact of rebasing the economy on the average Nigerian?
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, very little in terms of the impact on the average Nigerian. Rebasing has not changed the amount of naira that comes into his or her pocket. It has not led to any qualitative improvement in human welfare. That is the reality of it. But on the image of Nigeria and on the overall confidence that people have in the economy, I think it has had some positive effects. Number one, it has, of course, revised upwards the GDP figures. That's placed as numero uno, as the French, as the Italians will say, to the chagrin of the South Africans. And so it gives us some bragging rights. And in Brussels, some of my friends expected me to work with a swagger because Nigeria is now number one. And I said, well, not exactly. I wouldn't need to work with a swagger because it is only to whom much is given, much is expected. And that much is still being expected of us. Of course, it has given more confidence. Investors look at Nigeria in a more positive light. That cannot be a bad thing. And of course, it has revised upwards the GDP per capita that we had before. It is now about 2,500. So we're inching gradually into the middle income category of countries. But we still have a long way to go. And as they would say in Kenya, it is not yet uhuru.
What do you think, Mr. Fashwa?
Right. First of all, let me backtrack a bit. Talking about the crude oil, that there's this famous saying by one of the Saudi ministers of petroleum about 40, 50, 60 years ago, and he would say that the Stone Age did not end because people ran out of stones. And therefore, the oil age will not end because we will run out of oil. I mean, that there's going to be a time when people are going to shift attention from crude oil and all that. Remember, the Stone Age did not end because the world ran out of stones. But that said, in terms of diversifying the economy, I have an idea. Apart from agro-based, and I think by what doctor means, and if I must correct you slightly, he's not a deputy director, the deputy governor. So that's several notches up.
Yes.
And every time I see him, I learn a
Not at all, it's okay.
I learn a lot from him.
By the way,
but basically, in terms of that, I agree that we have to look at the agri sector in terms of diversifying the economy. I also agree that the whole talk about diversification is becoming a cliche. Everybody says it, nobody's doing it. But it can be done. It depends on where you approach it from. The problem with the Nigerian economy is so convoluted. Therefore, what you're looking for is which string to pull. So you have a thread, like a round ball thread, and you don't know where to figure it out from. You're looking for what string to pull in order for the problem to unravel. So it's easy to say, oh, we're going to go into manufacturing, but how? That's very, very expensive to start. But agree we can do. Number one, to feed ourselves. And secondly, to preserve our food. When you go to Europe, you never see them run out of potatoes. So why should we run out of yam all year round? Why should yam become very cheap and wasting at some point, and then the next season, you can't even find it to buy or it's so expensive? Why should that happen to our maize? Why are we buying on our shelves in our supermarket corn grown in America, in the US, and so on? So what can we do? There's a lot of industry that can spring up from there, but then again, we have to carry our people along to know that there's nothing wrong in eating canned food. This idea is to ensure that prices even all through the year. But I think he also mentioned education. So education is key. In fact, we can do a lot, starting with the educational sector. I think that our government should be providing jobs for secondary school leavers. If the focus was on providing jobs for secondary school leavers, number one, it takes attention away from this idea, I must go to university by all means. It makes them responsible on time. It takes away the pressure from their parents. It allows them to also save 1 or 2 years before going to university. And why not if not? We've got a problem with the environment. We've got a problem with security. We can employ hundreds of thousands to clean up our environment, to take care of our environment. So anyway, but to the issue of rebasing, the truth is, as he has said, it hasn't had much impact. And in fact, the devaluation of the Naira that we're seeing, every moment the Naira goes down, the value of the GDP drops as well. But it's good on paper. But you cannot say that it's what the
Okay,
people
Mr.
actually.
Thatcher, thank you very much,
yeah.
gentlemen. It's been a great pleasure. But just before we go, would give 30 seconds for both of you to have your final thoughts, on the program. I'll begin with you, Dr. Obadiah, 30 seconds.
Well, Kelechi, all I have to say is that, look, the future is extremely bright. This is a very blessed country. We will survive these elections. We hope and pray that the right person will be elected by the great Nigerian people. And I can assure you that the destiny of this country is far greater than Goodluck Jonathan or Muhammadu Buhari. Okay. This country is far greater than anybody. We will make sure that this country not only survives, but that it prospers and that we secure a future for our children.
Okay. Dr.
Yes, basically, I concur with Dr. Melafia to every extent. And, I believe so much in Nigeria. In fact, we're at the cusp of history. We're at that epoch-making moment in this country. God being on our side, we are just starting, okay? There's so much we can do so that the Nigerian anywhere in the world would have his pride and his dignity back. So, let's just go for it. Yes. God being on our side, I think we're going to swing it this time around.
Yes.
We hope so, and we'll keep our fingers crossed. Thank you so much. We've had in the studio a former deputy governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Obadiah Melafia, and an economic consultant, Tope Fasho. It's been a great pleasure having you on the show. Well, keep your comments coming in on our Twitter handle. It is at TVCnews_Africa, and on our Facebook page, TVC News Africa. Thank you so much for watching Nigeria Votes.